Hi, in this video we'll be continuing with the C# video tutorials. So we'll be continuing with passing arguments by reference. So this is I already did this I started to do it, but something happened to the video, so I had to restart this. So basically, we'll just talk about it again. So passing arguments by reference. So a reference parameter. So passing arguments by reference, usually in most languages, is pretty easy. It's not something that's special. So in C# it's special. There's like a ref keyword you can use. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I don't think you really need to use it. If there is some examples where you do, we'll go over that later on in the labs, in the examples that we do. So we'll just talk about it. But usually it's just something that's just kind of you just do automatically. Just something you just do when you code. So we'll just talk about it. So a reference parameter is a special type of parameter that does not receive a copy of the argument's value. So it's a little bit different in C#. It becomes a reference to the argument that was passed into it. When an argument is passed by reference to a method, the method can change the value of the argument in the calling part of the program. In C#, you declare a reference parameter by writing the ref keyword before the parameter variable's data type. To call a method that has a reference parameter, you also use the ref keyword before the argument. So we'll just do a little example here. So let's just say we have private void, like a method. So private void set 0. Let's just say we have a ref int val. Then here we just set val to 0 like that. And then to call it, you could say set to 0, or sorry, just set 0. We could say ref fair. That's pretty much it. We'll go over some more examples later on if we need to. We probably might see it later on in the labs. So the second part is using output parameters. An output parameter works like a reference parameter with the following differences. An argument does not have to be a value before it is passed into an output parameter. A method that has an output parameter must be the output parameter to some value before it finishes executing, so that's kind of confusing. In C#, you declare an output parameter by writing the out keyword. Okay, so we've seen this before. In I think we did, what was it called? Not toString, but parse int, or not like parse int or parse double. I think it's try parse. So int, try parse, double, try parse, those methods. So I think you use the out keyword in those automatically. But you can also declare them as well. So in C#, You declare an output parameter by writing the out keyword before the parameter variable's data type. So you can do that like this. So this is output parameters. So you could say private void set 0. I think there might be a typo in my notes. Apologize about that. Not a big typo. Okay, so it's just so basically you just say out here, then we just say int val, so before the variable. Here we could just say val points to 0. So to call a method that has a output parameter, you also use the keyword out before the argument. So here we could say int var, say set 0, could say out var. I know we're not really understanding it too well here, but when we do some examples, perhaps we might see this, so don't worry about it otherwise. We've seen an example of this in the past with some built-in C# methods itself. So if we need to use that or the other one that we talked about firstly, reference parameter, if we need to talk about it, then we'll talk about those later on if we need to. So the next one is value returning method. So that's just pretty much if you don't return a void, or sorry, if you don't return void, you return a value. So methods can return values. A value returning method is a method that returns a value to the part of the program that called it. A value returning method is like a void method in the following ways. It contains a group of statements that perform a specific task. It's not like a void method, but that's just the way, I guess that's just the definition here. So when you want to execute the method, you call it. I wouldn't think of them the same. But the .net framework provides many value returning methods. For example, the int.parse method that accepts a string and returns an int value. So basically some methods return a value. For example, in this case, the built-in method int.parse returns a value. It probably returns an int. Because toString, so int.parse is the opposite of a toString. So it converts its parameter to a integer, I guess. So it returns an int basically. So you can write your own value returning function. So there's a general type. Sorry, there's a general notation for that. We don't have to do it, but we can just quickly talk about it. So it's just, I don't think it's really important, but just not the general notation isn't important. But it goes like this: access modifier, data type, method name, and then parameter list. We have statements and a return expression, or in this case return value. So access modifier can be private or public. I believe there's also protected. But with that you need to talk about inheritance, which we haven't done. We'll probably do that last. So there's a data type, int, double, decimal string, bool, etc. Method name, the identifier of the method. Basically, that's whatever you want. Parameter list, an optional list of parameters. Expression can be any value, variable, or expression that has a value. So you may have seen me do these just for fun, like maybe in some of the examples where you could say, okay, well, I'll give you an example here. So let's just say we want a public method. Want it to return a boolean. So we'll say public bool is set. You could have it take a parameter. So you could say bool flag. So here in the method you could reference flag. You could say flag points to true. Or you could say if flag is equal to false, then you want to set flag to point to true. Just an example. Then here you could say, since it's a boolean method, I probably talked about this several times, but since it's a boolean method you have to return a boolean, so therefore you could say return flag. You could also say return true, or you could say return false. Because in a boolean you can return true or you can return false. Pretty much you can only return two values. In this case flag can be true or false, so we can just return flag. So that's pretty much it. So this is just some kind of logic you might use. So the return statement, there must be a return statement inside the method, which is usually the last statement of the method, so that's what we have here, return. So this return statement is used to return a value to the statement that called the method. So we just did an example. So the return value and the method's type must match. So this boolean must match this boolean. You can't return a string here. You can't just like return a string type when you have a string method. It has to match the type, obviously. You can't return a double when you have an int method and all that. It has to match, or else you get a type mismatch, whatever that's called in C#. So you could return values to variables. The value returning method returns a value with a specific type. However, the method no longer keeps the value once it is returned. You can declare a variable to hold the return value to use the value over and over again. So that's kind of like something like this. I think we've done it before. I've definitely done it before, just haven't talked about it. So you could say, okay, so we have an int val points to, then we could have, like, for example, actually we could say int. We could go with our, well, let's just go with another example here. So we just have, let's just say int val points to, let's pretend we have a method called sum, and it takes a user age and a friend age. So we could say that this method call is returning a value which we're storing in val. You don't need to do that, you could just call sum like that. But in this case, we want to point something to it. In this case, a variable, so we could store the value here for later. So we could also have, so we could have the definition of sum itself. We could say private int. So if sum returns an int, that's why we have a variable that's an int to point to sum. So we could say, okay, well, private int sum takes int val1 and a val2. We could return val1 plus val2. Boolean methods, we've talked about this. I can't remember if I've talked about this in Python completely, or it may have not been in C# in that case. I think I may have talked about it in the variable types. But just to expand on this, perhaps. So let's just talk about it for a sec. So a Boolean method returns either true or false. You can use a Boolean method to test a condition. So there's another way you can call a Boolean method. Or sorry, like the way you can test whether it's true or false. So if flag points to false, I think I've talked about this, but if flag points to false, that's the same thing as saying if not flag. That's just a trick they have in programming that says the same thing as if flag points to false, or actually it's the exact same as that, if flag points to false. Now if you want to say if flag points to true, then you just say if flag. So that's the trick that you have to know. You'll see it, sometimes you may not understand it. You may not see a good definition of why that's happening, but that's something you'll see often. So you can use the modulus operator in Boolean expressions. So the use of modulus operator to determine whether a whole number is odd or even. The modulus operator is a useful tool to write Boolean expressions. The number modulus, so let's just say val modulus 2, or val mod 2 has only two possible values, 0 or 1. So if we haven't seen this before, this is all that's happening. So you just say if val mod 2 points to 0, then here we just say number is even points to true, so you could have that as a Boolean perhaps, and then you could have else number is even points to false. You could have this exact thing as the same thing as a switch. I don't really use a switch, I'd rather just use an if or an else, but here you could say number switch number modulus 2, say case 0, number is even, points to true, break. Then you could have case 1, So the case, remember the case is what the values points to or equals to. So if the value points to 0, then number is true. Break. If the value is 1, then number is even. Points to false. Break. You don't need to include a default case in this one. So that's pretty much it. You can return a string from a method. So a string is a primitive data type. The C# value returning method can return a string to the statement that called it. Same idea, obviously. We don't really need to get into this too much. Debugging methods. I've showed you guys how to do that. We'll probably continue with that in the examples. Debugging is a great way to learn code, even when you don't have a problem. Just kind of stepping through the debugger is the best way to learn. Especially if you're learning code and you don't understand a concept. Best way is to just step through it in the debugger, especially actually. I was gonna say recursion, but the problem is it doesn't really help that much, but it helps a little bit. Or maybe, for example, data structures, very complex data structures, you may need to do that. That's the best way that I learned how to do it. But that's pretty much it. So in the next video, we'll be continuing with the labs. So thanks for watching, guys. If you guys like the video, you can like and subscribe to the channel to support the channel for more programming and investing tutorials. So hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.